Tonight's speaker has had his ear to the ground for decades and is a wealth of institutional knowledge about the governing of our state. Steve Frank appears weekly on 5 to 6 radio shows, including a monthly update with SVRW. Most impressively, Steve publishes a newsletter, California Political News and Views, 6 days a week, which I certainly recommend. Steve's passion for civic involvement goes back decades to his speaking career as an adolescent, winning in a debate contest the prize of a trip around the country. As a college student challenging the shutdowns of his university by protesters, Steve found himself on the Walter Cronkite show, followed by a call from the White House from then President Richard Nixon. And he has not retreated since. Physical and verbal assaults on Steve have not diminished his commitment to revealing the truth about policy choices and consequences. He knows how the sausage is made, and amazingly, he remains cheerful and appreciative. I am unaware of anyone more dedicated, more passionate, more informed, and hardworking on fighting for effective government in our once and future Golden State. So I'm very, very pleased to welcome back to the forum, Steve Frank.
Thank you very much, Jane. I certainly appreciate being back with you at the Liberty Forum. I spoke to the forum in October of 2008, almost a little over 12 years ago, and I enjoyed that opportunity. And I was very surprised and happy to receive a call from Jane asking if I would speak to them, to you once again. Let me suggest this. I am way too old to be subtle. You're not going to hear weasel words from me. You're not going to hear, well, on one hand this, on the other hand that. I am very direct. Whether you agree or disagree with me, when you come away from this presentation, you will know what I mean and what I said, and there won't be any need for clarification. When Jane asked me to speak, I had the thought that I would give what I would call my normal speech about the problems of California and how they now relate to the problems of the nation. And that was the tenor of my original preparation for tonight. But as I got into the presentation, I started realizing that we know what the problems are. I'm going to be going over some of them in relationship to California versus the national scene. I can also tell you about some of the action items that we should take. But one thing I've left out of speeches up to tonight is the root cause of the problems that we're facing. Not that we have taxes that are too high, not that we have a governor that is a rich, privileged dilettante, not that we have a US senator who was just appointed, who has decided that after 3 weeks in the US Senate, he wants to get rid of the filibuster. But what is the root cause of all this? And some of you who know me know that I'm a fan of Ayn Rand, the great objectivist philosopher and writer. She wrote a book called The Virtue of Selfishness. And when you read the book, it's a very small book, about 150 pages, you will understand that being selfish is a good thing. Why? Because it allows folks to succeed, to be productive, to produce. They're not looking out for the best of society as their goal. They're looking out at the best for themselves as the goal. Hence, society succeeds because everyone is a member of a society that is selfish, then succeeds. So what does that have to do with the problems we face today? As I started thinking about Ayn Rand's Virtue of Selfishness, I had only wished that she was still around today to write a sequel to that book, which I would call The Virtue of Intolerance. The root cause of our problems in America today, the problems in California, is not because we are too nice, too civil, or because we are educated, or because we want what's best for our country, is because we are too tolerant of what is happening in our country. Let me give you an example. As we know, in the last election, Election Integrity Project California found 440,000 people who were dead or living in other states who got live ballots. Nobody in California did anything about it. They didn't stop it. They knew about it. So 440,000 ballots went out to people, some of who are dead. Now, I do know that Democrats do have as a core philosophy that the dead do have constitutional rights. And why are we trying to take away their right to vote, even if they're dead? We don't believe that. Unfortunately, the Speaker of the House, as I call her, San Fran Nan Pelosi, does believe in that. And there's a bill that she is promoting called H.R. 1, which would use the California experience, allowing people to register to vote on election day without any vetting, without any ID, and they could vote as many times as they want at different polling places using different names because they won't get caught. That's what she has in H.R. 1, same day registration and voting. Then you have another portion that's similar to San Francisco, where if you're running for Congress and you raise $10,000, the federal taxpayers will give you $60,000 in order to run for Congress, just like they have in San Francisco. If you're running for the Board of Supervisors or the mayor's race or district attorney, you raise $10,000, the city will give you $60,000. That's part of the reason the city of San Francisco has a $635 million deficit. They're using money meant for education, for the homeless, drug abuse, cleaning of the streets, instead for people who are running for office and using the tax dollar as the means of doing so, rather than showing their ability to raise money on their own. But H.R. 1 goes beyond that. It nationalizes all elections in the United States. No more voter ID. Literally, you could show up, say your name is Jane Smith, and you get to vote, and no one can question it, and you don't have to show any ID because it would be illegal under H.R. 1. Illegal aliens would be able to vote under this system, as they do now in the state of California. Former Secretary of State Alex Padilla, now U.S. Senator, refused to allow an audit of the voting rolls based on the DMV registration of hundreds of thousands of people, of which they admit they registered over 135,000 people illegally, who are still on the voting rolls, and in November 2020 did receive a live ballot. We don't know how many illegal aliens there were. And by the way, I'm using that term because that's the term in the law. But if you're in the Biden White House, there's a new term for illegal aliens, non-citizens. That's what they're called these days. Just like somebody visiting here from England or from Nigeria or from Japan, they would be considered non-citizens, just as somebody that just snuck across the border. So the very first problem that we have is our elections. And if we don't have honest elections, what type of government do we have? So the major problem that's facing California and the nation today is that of legal elections, honest elections, non-corrupt elections. Sadly, we have not had an honest election in California in more than a decade. Let me go on to the second area. Some of you may remember about 5-6 years ago at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, there was a conservative gentleman, a gay guy, who was to speak to the young Republicans on campus. The police had to be called in, and he had to be taken from the campus to protect his life because the tolerant left wanted to kill him while giving a speech. About the same time, Ann Coulter tried to give a speech at Cal Berkeley, as was Ben Shapiro. Neither Shapiro nor Coulter were allowed to speak at Berkeley because they were conservatives, and conservatives are not allowed to speak at that campus. We didn't have the phrase cancel culture at the time, but that was the beginning of the problem. Now we have nationally a movement by an affiliate of the Lincoln Project, which was an anti-Trump activity, to show all the Trump people who were members of the administration that they're not allowed to work in America. So let's say you have a corporation, the Acme Corporation, and you're going to hire a deputy secretary of education under Trump for your business. These people will come out, picket you, go to your stockholders, go to the public, call you racist, call you all sorts of names, and not allow you to hire this person. If you hire them, all hell will break loose. The cancel culture has gone from Washington, D.C., from Sacramento, from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, from Cal Berkeley, is now a national phenomenon. We also have, of course, and you guys are in the center of it all, Silicon Valley, which may be the largest cancel culture headquarters in the nation, with Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, and several other social platforms literally banning speeches. Just last week, YouTube took off the speech of President Trump from at his CPAC speech because, according to YouTube, he gave out disinformation, according to them, and therefore he's not allowed to be heard. Now, what type of society do we have with that? As we go through this, let me give you an idea as to where this is all going. I doubt if many of you heard of the phrase, the four olds, O-L-D-S. And the four olds are old ideas that have to be gotten rid of, old culture that has to be stamped out, old habits that have to be stopped, and old customs that we have to get rid of. Where does the four olds come from? Mao Zedong. This is the guiding slogan and theme of his regime in Peking. It was he who determined the four olds. He wanted to get rid of old ideas. Isn't that what the 1619 Project is of the New York Times? San Francisco getting rid of schools with the name of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and even that famous racist Dianne Feinstein. I say that jokingly, of course. They are getting rid of old ideas. We are getting rid of the old culture by going through the entertainment field, and Disney is the best example of it. I did not know that Mickey Mouse was a racist. I didn't know that Dumbo was a racist, or Peter Pan. And now we have the latest, Pepe the Pew is a sexist and shouldn't be allowed to be seen by young kids. So we're getting rid of the old culture, things that we feel good about, but at the same time, we are seeing that the government, along with corporations, are going woke and determining anything that is the old culture has to go. Old habits, going to school, going to church, going to work, not by computer, but by going to an office. These habits are gone. Going to restaurants, they're trying to take that away from us as well. So we have old habits that are gone, and finally, old customs. The best example of it, I want you to think back to last Easter or last Christmas. Where were you? Were you allowed in the sanctuary of your church, or were you forced to watch church services over Zoom or in the cold outside of the church with only a few people attending? The custom of religious freedom is gone from America today, started in California by, as I call him, Governor Nuisance. He made the determination that these churches need to be closed, these customs. Remember the 4th of July parties we went to last year? They didn't exist. Labor Day parties, they didn't exist. Even the Super Bowl parties, we were told not to meet with more than 2 or 3 people to watch the Super Bowl. Old customs are gotten rid of. So the four olds, old ideas, culture, habits, and customs are a severe part of the tolerance that we've had. Then we have the criminal element of all this. You folks in the Bay Area know about Chesa Bowden, the DA of San Francisco, whose adoptive mother is a lady by the name of Bernadine Dorn, who spent time in prison as a terrorist and killing a cop. His adopted father, Bill Ayers, was the founder of the Weather Underground, a violent organization, and the guy who gave Barack Obama his start in politics. Yet this man is now the district attorney of San Francisco, allowing drug dealers loose, human sex trafficking, and instead of taking care of criminals, he's going after cops and law enforcement. And I have some great news for you. Yesterday, a recall was filed in San Francisco to get rid of Chesa Bowden and his terrorist background from the district attorney's office of San Francisco. But we have the same thing going on in Los Angeles and throughout the state. Why? Because we have a governor, Governor Newsom, who has opened the doors to the prisons. Now, I don't want to make this partisan, but he didn't start this. It was Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, a Republican, who started the practice of opening the prison doors for criminals. Now we're down to the lowest amount of prisoners in the last 30 years in the state prisons and the highest amount of violent crimes in 30 years in California. And of course, I don't even have to tell you that if you're an illegal alien that commits a crime, Governor Newsom and Governor Brown before him will give you a pardon or a commutation so you don't get deported. So we have a terrible crime problem. Now we have Joe Biden opening the doors of the border, getting the guards out of the way and allowing people to come in. We are in the midst of a crisis. Just today, the Secretary of Homeland Security testified before the Senate that we are about to hit a crisis in the next few days or weeks with the incoming amount of illegal aliens. There's been a report that in May, there'll be 13,000 illegal alien children coming into our country. That group has already been formed in Guatemala, Honduras, etc., and they're getting ready to start moving into the United States with open arms from the President of the United States. Then we have an Attorney General of California who's going to be the new Secretary of Health and Human Services. But in the meantime, he's the Attorney General of California. And you may not know this, but the state of California has created a research department on gun violence in the state, giving tax dollars to universities to do research on gun violence in California. Well and good. So where are they going to get their information from? From the Attorney General. Yet Xavier Becerra, the Attorney General, has made a determination that he's not going to give the data to any researcher or any department of the state government and said, sue me to get that material. Now, the only reason that he would have not to give up that data, because he's a well-known individual that wants to repeal the Second Amendment, is because the data will show that guns make it safer, not more dangerous, for honest people in California. Now, this guy is going to take his views to Health and Human Services and declare a gun crisis, as progressives have already talked about, using it as a health issue to confiscate guns on the basis that this is a health crisis. So what happens in California does not stay in California, it goes to Washington, D.C. The next thing is the issue of the closing of the churches. We have had churches closed based on no data. Many churches have requested the data from the governor's office as to why they're not safe. Let me give you an example. Some of you know I live in Simi Valley, and if you know me really well, I don't play golf, I don't play tennis. What I do love to do is to grocery shop. I love to grocery shop. I know the prices of everything from bread to meats, and it relaxes me to go grocery shopping. About 4 weeks ago, I went to the neighborhood Vons, which is owned by Safeway, and at the entrance, there was a sign that said, by order of the County of Ventura, only 460 people may be in this store at one time. 460 people in the Vons grocery store. Diagonally across the street from the Vons shopping center and the Vons store is a church. And under county rules and state rules, only 10 people are allowed to be inside that church at one time. 10. So you can't pray, but you can buy lettuce. So my suggestion to people who are congregants, why not just have your services at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning at the produce section at Vons and see if they'll throw you out? Because you can be in Vons and pray, but you can't be in church and pray. That's how crazy it is. And so if you ask the question, why is Gavin Newsom being recalled? That's one of the reasons, as a simple one. Let me go to two other issues before I come to some solutions. First, that of immigration. I'm sure you know there are approximately 15 million illegal aliens in the state of California. That's a lot. I'm sorry, in the country. We have 2 to 3 million here in California. But that's not enough for Joe Biden. He has just imported 25,000 illegal aliens from Mexico. And here's the kicker. Those who came into California are going to cost you, the taxpayer, $28 million to be quarantined in hotels for 2 weeks, free health care, free welfare, and free travel to any state in the union that they want to go to live in. What aren't they doing in California? They are not testing the illegal aliens that are coming in by Joe Biden's order for the COVID virus. Why is that important? Because the governor of Texas is not like the governor of California. He put the National Guard on the border. He put his Texas Rangers on the border. And as the illegal aliens came into his country, thanks to Joe Biden, he is giving them a virus test. And so far, he's found 108 people that Biden brought into this country with the virus. And these people are going to be shipped all over the country, and they're going to spread the virus. And when I was looking at this, I remembered back in 1918, there was a lady that they called Typhoid Mary when they had the typhoid epidemic. And she spread typhoid to all parts of her country. What difference is there between a Typhoid Mary and a Virus Joe? He is spreading the COVID virus around the country. At the same time, he's saying take the vaccine to save yourself. But even if you do take the vaccine, you still have to be in lockdown and you still can't go anywhere. And you can't open up amusement parks fully. You can't open up restaurants fully. You can't open up stadiums fully, but that's what we're going to do. The last item is one of the most interesting ones for me. You may remember after the George Floyd incident in Minnesota, there were riots in several cities, riots, burning, looting, and there was a request to send the National Guard into those cities to quell the riots. Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas had an op-ed piece for the New York Times saying that we should send National Guard to these different hotspots around the country to stop the rioting. The two editors who allowed that to be published were fired for publishing it. And remember, that was back in June, only 9 months ago. The New York Times apologized for running such a crazy article saying the National Guard should be brought in. That was in June of 2020. Fast forward to January 2021, and Nancy Pelosi demanded that the National Guard be brought into Washington, D.C. for a riot that was a one-day event, wasn't much of a riot, no burnings, no stores were overturned or ransacked, no cars were overturned or burned. And yes, American citizens invaded the Capitol and a cop killed an innocent civilian. But Pelosi demanded that we have the National Guard. Now, why is that allowed when Senator Cotton made the determination that to stop the rioting in Minneapolis, in Seattle, in Portland, in Los Angeles, in Denver, and other places, that we needed the National Guard? This is the hypocrisy and the double standard of the left. This is how they use us. And why? Because we are a tolerant society. And that is the root cause of our problems. And that is where we have to start. We need to stop being tolerant of people who say we're not allowed to read Dr. Seuss, that we're not allowed to bring in the National Guard to stop riots. We need to be able to speak up and speak out and organize against the left, who's taking away our freedoms. The First Amendment rights of free speech and religious freedom, certainly in California, is gone. In most of the country, it is gone. There are a few good states like Iowa and today Wyoming, Arizona, Mississippi, and Texas are all open and free states once again. And there'll be more states as days go by. California will not be one of them because we are too tolerant of saying to our pastors, why aren't you opening the church? The First Amendment exists. And if the pastor doesn't want to open the church, find a new pastor or a new church, because you don't need a politician as a pastor. You need a spiritual leader. And the First Amendment gives him or her that right to be the spiritual leader. And if they're not going to show leadership, find a new leader. But let's look at some of the things that we can do proactively. First is the recall. Now, as you know, we're going to have a recall election against Governor Newsom. About 2 million signatures have already been gathered with an 83% verification rate, more than enough signatures to qualify for a September or early October recall election. But that's not all. There's already a recall, as I mentioned, that was just started yesterday against the district attorney, Bowden, in San Francisco. 2 weeks ago, a recall group was formed to recall George Gascon, the district attorney of Los Angeles. About a week ago, a recall election committee was formed in La Mesa because one of the school board members claimed that opening schools is akin to slavery. So that school board member is going to be recalled. And in the bastion of the beast, in the belly of the beast, in San Francisco, there's a recall effort going on against 3 school board members. Now, I know of many other attempts at recalls around the state. They'll be announced shortly within the next month, at least a dozen around the state that I haven't mentioned. So the first thing we could do is not worry about who's going to win in November of 2022. Let's get rid of the bad apples now through recall. Recall a couple of these people and the others will pay attention. And that's what it takes, throwing them out on their ears when they claim that opening schools is akin to slavery. When you have district attorneys like Gascon and Bowden representing the criminal class, George Gascon just appointed a liaison attorney prosecutor with law enforcement, but this person has said many times that cops are killers. Now, how is this person going to have a relationship with the police when she believes they're killers and the cops believe she hates them? All true on both sides. That's what we're facing. So the first thing is recall. Second, we need to have the beginnings of a cancel culture events, forming groups. We need to go out to bookstores demanding they sell Dr. Seuss. We need to go to college campuses and say we deserve free speech on the campus. We need to have people who are really part of the system saying we're not going to take it enough. There was a great movie in 1976 called Network, and you remember the star in the picture finally said, "I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore." And those were the words used 2 years later by Howard Jarvis to pass Prop 13. We need to be mad as hell and say we're not going to take it anymore, and we need to create cancel the cancel culture events. Now, one of the more interesting factors in all this, some may say, well, this is all Republican and right-wing stuff. But Bill Maher, who's a comedian on HBO and a very left-wing Democrat and proud of it, but he is an honest man who believes in the Constitution, and he suggests that we need to start groups called Stand Your Ground movement. Now, what he means by that is stop apologizing for being whatever gender you are, whatever race you are, whatever religion you are. You're an American. And let's stop apologizing for being a hyphenated American that somebody has put onto you. Whether you're gay or straight, who cares? Black, white, or Hispanic or Asian, who cares? Let's stop apologizing for being who we are. Let's be proud of who we are rather than trying to denounce ourselves. As you may know, Coca-Cola has tried to put forth a program of sensitivity training for its employees, with the goal being, the stated goal is to make their employees less white. What type of racism is that? And we need to stand up to this. We need to stop apologizing for being white, for being black, for being Hispanic. We are Americans. And if we don't stop apologizing, we are too tolerant to survive in a free society. We won't have it. The next thing is, I mentioned to you before about the 2 editors that were fired by the New York Times for the audacity of printing an op-ed piece by a US senator suggesting that the National Guard should be used to quell riots around the country. We need to get the journalists to organize for the First Amendment. We need them to stop kowtowing to the wokeness of the left and refusing to report all the facts and instead providing news stories that are straight bias or press releases from the left. We need journalists to join a crusade against wokeness and in favor of the First Amendment. And if we get enough journalists to do that, maybe we'll embarrass and humiliate the non-journalists who are still writing for papers around the country or reporting for CNN and other news stations. Next is, we are social justice warriors. That needs to be our mindset. When I put out my my bio to groups, I say 3 things about myself, one of which I am a fighter for human rights, and freedom is a human right. We have to have that mindset of freedom being a human right. And that's extremely important. So let me end with this before I go to the questions. We are too tolerant a society. We have allowed our tolerance, our civility, our ability to speak out to be pushed back in order to allow the more loud, the more egregious left and progressives to take away our rights in the First Amendment, to take away our rights to jobs, to our rights to discussion and free speech, to be able to hire people that we want who are qualified, whether or not they work for the Trump administration. We need to be intolerant. And I will be writing a book called The Virtue of Intolerance. And that's what we need to be, is intolerant if we're going to save freedom in the United States. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity, and I certainly look forward to any questions that you may have.
Wow, Steve, thank you so much. Lots to chew on, lots to chew on. Let's jump right in, because I know you're a fan of questions, and I want to start with this proposed legislation that says you'll be fined $1,000 if you as a retailer distinguish between girls and boys departments for clothing and toys and products like sheets. This is usurping the control of the risk-taking business owner, the retailer in this case, and the consumers who vote with their dollars. This is taking that power away from them. Would you speak to that?
Well, this is part of the four olds. They want to get rid of the old habits. You as a mother, take your daughter into a shop to buy her first brassiere, to buy her underwear, to buy her dresses. And it's a very personal thing between you and your daughter. And the same thing for fathers to take their sons in to the boy shop to buy boys' clothes. What they're trying to say is there are no boys, there are no girls, there is one gender, and that makes it no gender, which allows us to have, as they did in the state of Iowa, the state of Iowa had a state tournament for women athletes, running, jumping, javelin, and all that. And the major portions of that were won by men, allowed to participate against women. And so women have been destroyed. Imagine the WNBA, the Women's National Basketball Association, having only men playing basketball, or the Women's Golf Tour, only men playing golf. That's the natural progression. The idea of the boys and girls at the retail shops, that's the slippery slope. My wife likes to shop at a dress shop called Ann Taylor. Wonderful shop. She likes the quality of their stuff, and that's where she wants to shop. God bless her. But what happens when it stops being boys and girls that have to be one gender, and it has to be men and women? So she's going to be shopping in the same store, intermixed with men. Women have the right to go to a dress shop. Men have a right to go to a men's shop. And this right is being taken away from us. And it goes back to the Chinese of getting rid of the old culture, the old ideas, habits, and customs. And amazingly, the Sacramento legislature is using China as the role model to emulate for government policy. Shame on them.
It's astonishing. Several questions, Steve, tonight about the recall. Could you describe the process? Do you believe that Gavin Newsom will be recalled? And could you explain to our audience what the process for that is?
Well, first I'll give the process, then I'll give the second part of the question. By March 17th, all the signatures have to be into the registrar of voters in each of the counties. We will have, and I've been the strategist for Recall Gavin 2020 since last April. So I've been deeply involved in the process. Then on April 29th, the registrar of voters have to give a number to the Secretary of State for their county, how many verified signatures there were. And on May 9th, the Secretary of State has to announce whether or not there were enough signatures for a verification. Then the governor has 30 days to come to your house to bully and harass you, to demand you sign a petition to take your name off of the recall petition.
Excuse me, Steve, what do you mean by that?
Excuse me?
What do you mean by he has the right to come to my house and bully me?
The law said, after the Josh Newman recall 2 years ago in Orange County, the Democrats changed the law. So you signed the recall petition for Gavin Newsom, and let's say you signed it in January. So now you're in May. Under the state law, the governor or one of his agents has the right to come to your home and ask you to sign a petition removing your name from the recall petition. Now, when they go to your home, do you actually think they're going to say, hey, why don't you be nice and we don't really want to get rid of the governor, take it off? Or if you have a government contract or you're a government worker, do you want to keep your job or your contract? That's how it works. It opens up the door for bullying, harassment, extortion, blackmail. But that's what the Democrats gave us. Then, after the 30 days, and there's still enough signatures for the recall, the Secretary of State has to announce a date of an election between 60 and 80 days from then. So we're looking at, because of some other minor factors, sometime, excuse me, in middle of September to have that. Then in to early October to have the actual election. There will be only two issues on the ballot. The first question is, shall Gavin Newsom be recalled as governor of California, yes or no? It's a yes or no question on the ballot. Second, if the yeses win, if there's more yeses than nos, who shall become governor? Now, you don't need a runoff. You don't have to have 50% plus one. The person who gets the most votes is the one who wins. So you could win with 25% of the vote. In 2003, there was 132 people on the ballot, to give you an idea. And I would suspect we'll have the same. So we have, as to the process, there will be several Republicans running with some traction. And I can announce here for the first time, it looks like the Democrats now have a candidate to run for governor. His name is Antonio Villaraigosa, the man who ran against Newsom in the Democrat primary 2 years ago. And he is now making provisions in order to run for governor. And I certainly hope he does, because the reason we won and got rid of Gray Davis in 2003 is because we were losing that race for the recall until the lieutenant governor, Cruz Bustamante, got into the race, gave the Democrats cover to get rid of Gray Davis, saying, hey, we could elect a Democrat governor so we won't lose anything. So with somebody like Villaraigosa in the race, the Democrats could say the same thing again, and we could have a change of parties. I don't think Villaraigosa wins. I think he winds up to be another Cruz Bustamante.
It's going to be really interesting. One of our listeners or audience members says, is this going to be a recall election by mail?
Jane, I'm really sorry to inform you. About a month ago, I believe it was, the Democrats passed a bill, no Republicans voted for it, making the 2022, any election held between now and 2022, November 2022, are all mail ballots. In other words, they covered the recall election as an all mail ballot election, just as we had in November of 2020. So the answer is yes.
Okay. And another audience member, just to keep going for just one more second on this topic of the recall, is, do you think there'll be enough momentum once the state opens up to be angry enough to sustain the recall effort?
I disagree with your phrase, the state opening up. The governor made the big deal about opening up Dodger Stadium and Angel Stadium when only 100 people could go in, or at very best. Now, Dodger Stadium has approximately 54,000 seats. At best, they'd have 7,500 fans. In a year, they would have that many. In a year, 7,500 allowed to see the game. The Dodgers can't afford that. Disneyland, it opens up, or any other amusement park, I'll use Disneyland, at 15%. And if things go good, It could be 25%. And at the end of the year, if things go really, really good, it'll be open up to 35%. But Jane, you can't go. You live more than 120 miles from Disneyland. Therefore, you're not eligible to go to Disneyland because his ruling said only people who live within 120 miles and live in the state of California may go. So everyone who's on this call from the Silicon Valley, you guys, you could go to Six Flags if that opens, but you can't go to Disneyland. You can't go to Knott's Berry Farm. You can't go to SeaWorld. And only if you've paid over $100,000 a year for season tickets to the Dodgers can you go see the Dodgers if you're lucky enough to be picked to see them.
Okay, this is mind-boggling. So another audience member wants to know, with all these shutdowns, why aren't the business owners outside with signs? Why aren't they protesting? Why is it just the unions protesting? Why aren't the people, the individual store owners, the small business owners out protesting?
It has really confused me as to why the unions have been fighting to open up the state, because there's so many union members that could be opening. As you know, school board union members want to keep the schools closed because they still get paid full pay and benefits whether or not they teach. So it doesn't bother them whether things are open or closed. But what really surprises me is the business owners that refuse to do it. I live, next town over from me is Thousand Oaks. They have a place called the Pizza Cookery. Wonderful pizza. It's a large, large place. And they have a sign in front of it that says, "We have never closed." And they are being sued by the county of Ventura for opening it up. Let me tell you, if you get there after 11 o'clock in the morning, any day of the week, you'll be waiting online for an hour or so. It is packed till late at night when it closes. The good news is the owner is suing the county. And what is he suing for? The data showing that it's unhealthy for people to come into his pizza place. And the county is refusing to give the data, and there's good reason for it. It doesn't exist. Just as Governor Newsom refuses to give the data on the closing of restaurants and businesses on the basis of health, he doesn't have such data. It's all junk science and his word. And once the data comes out, you're going to see massive lawsuits against government for the corruption of closing our state for political purposes.
Well, along those lines, here's a question about judges. Are there any judges who have sufficient respect for the Constitution to turn back the tide against the COVID-justified evisceration of our God-given rights? If so, how best to make use of them? Thoughts, Steve?
We have noticed the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, has been ruling in favor of religious freedom. Just 2 days ago, they voted to allow a student who had permission in a Georgia State college to give out religious tracts and information and speak at the free speech movement about his religious beliefs. He was stopped, he sued, and now the Supreme Court said the state of Georgia and that university or state college was wrong and it was illegal for what they did. We know that up in Santa Clara County, the Supreme Court about 2 weeks ago ordered all the churches open in York County. The only problem I had with that is they didn't do it in the 58 other counties as well. They just did it in Santa Clara County. Churches in San Diego that have gone to the U.S. Supreme Court have won their case. So the only court that seems to be willing to abide by the First Amendment is the U.S. Supreme Court.
Another question. John says it would be great if a trustworthy group set up a GoFundMe type of effort to raise money that would be used to fund these DA and school board recalls. Does that exist?
GoFundMe has stopped candidates they disagreed with from raising money on GoFund. People who have been arrested as part of the Capitol incident on January 2nd, they've not been allowed to do GoFundMes for hiring of attorneys and bail money. GoFundMe has turned into a progressive operation censoring conservatives. So I'm not sure GoFundMe is the right thing. I would suggest that maybe the conservatives in the technology community will come up with their own version of GoFundMe, just as conservatives came up with Parler and Gab as a alternative to Facebook and Twitter.
Do you want to comment on the need for groups like No Left Turn, getting things done to fight against our children being indoctrinated by the left at such a young age?
We have kindergarten kids in California that are being taught about sexual positions, and fifth graders that are being taught to take puberty blockers because they're confused at fifth grade level as to whether a boy or a girl, and they're being told that there is no such thing as boy or girl. So you could be a boy now, but you could be a girl tomorrow, and all you have to do is take these drugs and help transition you from one to the other. LA Unified has teachers who've been caught legally and not breaking the law, taking seventh graders to Planned Parenthood to have abortions and never telling the parents that they did this. It is time for us. If you notice in my presentation, I use the phrase government schools. They are not public schools. They're not owned by the public. They're owned by the unions and the government. And that's why I'm a big supporter for the 2022 November ballot of an educational choice initiative, of which I'm a strategist for as well, to get that on the ballot and pass, to allow parents to make a decision as to whether their kids can go to private school, public school, homeschool, etc. Congressman Tom McClintock has a great line, and I always steal it, but I do give him credit for it. He says, you know what makes Ford great? General Motors. And what he's talking about is competition makes Ford a better company, makes General Motors a better company. And education would be better if there was competition. If government schools had to compete against private schools for students, then maybe something would change. Until the monopoly is ended, you can expect poor test results. You can expect, in your county of Santa Clara, you have a 20% dropout rate of high school students for the past year. Normally, it may be no more than 12%. It's now up to 20%, and it's probably higher than that.
Yeah,
but that's
I'm
all
sure.
they're counting
Yeah,
in your county.
I'm sure it's going to go higher. Well, Steve, you know, you're very old school because competition hurts feelings, and we can't have that. So on to the next question.
Well, let me just say, I am so old that I remember that getting a trophy meant you won something.
No, you're just going to confuse some of our audience. So.
Well, today, the schools give out trophies to anybody who participates, win or lose. So why put out the effort to win if you're going to get the same trophy as the guy who doesn't do anything?
Yeah, I'll tell you though, I've seen that happen, and the kids see right through that, right? The kids see right through it.
Of course they do, and that's why they're dropping out in such high numbers. They see that this internet education is worthless, doesn't exist.
Yeah. It's also pretty disrespectful of the kids. It sets such a low bar. So we have another question here. This person says, I'm interested in knowing what Steve thinks about whether California is being depopulated by Californians leaving, or whether people are still moving in and coming to keep the population stable. Are there any political party shifts statewide?
The good news is productive people are leaving the state as fast as they can. The bad news is that they're being replaced by illegal aliens and people on welfare, minimum wage type people. We're not getting the innovators. Up your way, you have Oracle, you have Packard, SpaceX, Elon Musk moving some of his factories to Texas. McKesson has left. Charles Schwab has left. The well-paying jobs are gone, and they're not being replaced with other well-paying jobs. They're being replaced by people who are without education, who are here illegally, and they're not qualified to go into a garage and start a computer company.
Well, on that note, one of our audience members would like me to ask you how freedom-loving states can inoculate themselves against the leftism as the Californians flee the dystopia they are creating. Won't they go and vote for the same things that they were running from?
One of the largest selling bumper stickers in the state of Texas says, "Don't Californicate Texas." They are concerned about that, and they should be. The Houston area could well be Berkeley. You couldn't tell much of a difference between the policies in Houston which is Harris County, and the policies in Berkeley up in Alameda County. So the people in Texas are aware of that. But interestingly enough, the Texas Republican Party has made major inroads with the Hispanic community, and they've done it very simply. They've shown what they believe in: low taxes creates jobs, that low taxes and a sane regulatory situation creates a low cost of living, and people can live well in Texas on significantly less money. I don't know if any of you gassed up today, but I spoke to a friend of mine in Dallas this morning, and he paid $2.46 a gallon for gasoline, and he complained about it. And so, yeah, it is a problem, and these states do have to recognize it. But with good leadership, it's okay.
Okay. Let's talk about money and policy for a minute. We have quite a shameful thing happen here. And correct me, Steve, if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that we have a disastrous $1 billion, maybe $11 billion loss of taxpayer money sent to dubious addresses in California. We have somebody who heads our workforce development agency heading to Washington to be the deputy labor secretary, despite an unemployment scandal, check scandal that is just beyond my wildest imagination. The money that was just lost. Could you speak to that?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely wrong. It's not $1 billion. It's not $11 billion. It is $31 billion that went to people who illegally accepted money over a 2-year period.
And this is people, excuse me, but I want to clarify, this is people in Russia and China and Nigeria, right? This money went all over the world.
In San Quentin.
In San Quentin, very nice. Well, you can always
They did keep
use a little more cash for cigarettes. But Steve, I really want to slow down on this. This is California taxpayers. This is people that have been sitting in their chairs or digging ditches or doing something hard all day. Their hard-earned tax dollars went to where?
San Quentin, Pelican Bay, China, Ukraine, all over the world. But it gets worse than that. Yes, people worked hard and their tax dollars are going to the wrong place, but there's over 1 million people who deserve to get an unemployment check from the state of California who can't get it, while the guy on death row is getting it.
And is that money just gone and lost forever?
The lady's name is Julie Su, S-U-H, and she's going to be in charge of unemployment policies nationwide. She can do for the nation what she's done for California, but that's the type of person that they are appointing in Washington. They're not looking for the best, they're looking for the worst, and they are getting a lot of them from California, which is sad. I mean, the Attorney General of California, who believes that every baby should be aborted, who believes that guns should be taken away regardless of what the factors are, who has been using his office to disobey the state law on the death penalty, is now going to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services, where he's going to be able to tell you what type of doctor you could see and when you could see him and how often. That's what they're going to be doing. That's what the single payer program that he's to implement is going to be doing. It's a disaster. And so Judy Sue is just an example of the corruption and mismanagement in the state of California. I don't even have to tell you about the incompetence of the DMV. And the funny part is, if you remember, I mentioned they registered 135,000 people illegally. When the law came up for hearings that they would be put in charge, the head of the DMV testified that they were incapable of doing that job. So the head of the DMV knew this was not something they were capable of doing and admitted it publicly at a public hearing. That didn't stop the Democrats from giving him the job, and 135,000 people got ballots who shouldn't have, and the Secretary of State refuses to do an audit to get rid of those people that the DMV said were illegally registered.
This refusing the audits thing is just audacious. I'm not even clear how that can happen. Although stay tuned for next month because we're going to talk about that. Steve, people are wondering what they can do. What can an average citizen do to make changes in California and around the country? Do we join a random committee? Do we protest? What do we do?
Be a role model. Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, show up at church. Demand the church be opened. Go to a restaurant. Demand that the restaurant serve you inside. I don't know what the temperature's been like where you are, but my wife and I on Friday night, we went out to a restaurant, had to eat outside. It was 62 degrees. We were catching a cold just sitting out there trying to eat when we should have been inside, which was nice and cozy, but the government wouldn't allow it. We need to be speaking up. We need to tell our students what a real education is about. What would happen, for instance, if we just stopped sending our kids to government schools when they're not teaching because they're using the internet? What would happen if a large number of people just turned off the computer? That's the type of action we need to take. I'll give you one other example. As you may know, Mike Lindell from My Pillow has been boycotted by Bed Bath & Beyond, Kohl's, and some other places. You can't buy his products there. There's a group of women here in Simi Valley that like to shop at Bed Bath & Beyond. So they go once a week, different day each week, and not all at the same time. And they go and they fill up a basket full of little things from all over the store. They go to the cashier and say, you know, I'm looking for My Pillow. Where can I find it? They're told by the cashier, oh, we don't sell that anymore. And they just leave the items in the cart in the cashier's lane and walk away. Those are the type of guerrilla actions that are being taken by people who, as the guy in Network said, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. We have to have that mindset that we're not going to take it anymore. When Gavin Newsom says only 100 people can go to a Dodger game, we need to say we're going to go no matter what and have a few thousand people show up demanding entrance to the game. Let the Dodgers explain where the science is, then sue the Dodgers and the governor for not opening the doors.
Speaking of suing, there's a question about, is there an equivalent of the ACLU that would help sue an employer for a hostile work environment in companies that require this racial sensitivity training, which seems to be inherently racist itself?
Here in California, we have Pacific Justice Institute. There's a Landmark Institute that's nationwide that does that sort of thing. There's several, I'll call them conservative, but they're really constitutional law firms that are nonprofit that do this type of lawsuit. And you should talk to a man by the name of Brad Dacus.
Mhm.
excuse me, who's head of the Pacific Justice Institute here in California, because he's the right person to find that lawsuit.
Okay.
The other part of the problem, which you haven't mentioned, is what happens to the employee who refuses to take a vaccine.
Do you think that there'll be a passport proposed in California, a vaccine passport?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it will become a legal issue, a major legal issue. And I will presume that Brad and Pacific Justice Institute will handle that case, because that's the bottom of all of this. It has nothing to do, the lockdowns, the end of church, the end of schools, has nothing to do with schools, church, or free speech. It has to do with government control over the individual. You're stuck at home. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't go to church. You're limited in where you can go. On Saturday, I went shopping for something, and I passed a Bank of America. And there was a line of about 20 people outside. It was 55 degrees at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. And they were standing outside because they're only allowing a few people in at a time. People are going to get sick, and not from the virus, but from the flu and the cold, because they're stuck outside. And at some point in time, there's going to have to be lawsuits. But this has nothing to do with what we see, the schools, the churches. This has to do with government control of your life. The idea that you live in Silicon Valley and you're not allowed to go to visit Disneyland?
It's
What
pretty
type of
incredible.
cockamamie idea is that?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So on a dark note, a question, looking for a comment from you. This person is rereading Fahrenheit 451 5 decades later. Said, I never thought I'd read it again, too illusory to be credible, but alas, we're living it now. I wonder when it will be inflamed along with the cat in the hat. Asking for your comments there.
You could go on to Amazon or eBay and buy Mein Kampf. You can't go on eBay or Amazon to buy Cat in the Hat. That's how sick it is. And books are being banned by the day. It's only a matter of time. There's a great author, you may not agree with him, Robert Heinlein, who has some really interesting ideas. Inflammatory ideas if you believe in freedom. He really believes in freedom. Why not ban Animal Farm in 1984? Those books need to be banned because they're proposing freedom. That's what this is about. It has nothing to do with Dr. Seuss in the 1920s, Ted Gazelle writing some racist stuff about Japanese, which he did and apologized for afterwards when he realized that it was wrong. Cat in the Hat is just a staple of kids. Get rid of it. That's why the idea that the Chinese have of getting rid of the four olds, of ideas, culture, habits, and customs, that's what's running our government today, running our society today, getting rid of the four olds. And sadly, nobody's talking about that the actual formation of all this is China. This policy of tolerance to get rid of entertainment, jobs, religion, education, all comes from a Chinese basis.
Yeah, it fits in very well with their model, no doubt, no doubt. So we'll wind up, Steve. I think you've been really generous, but I just want to see if there are any, if you want to say anything about leadership in the state, if you see us needing to get behind one person, if you have hope for anyone in particular.
I have a slogan that says leaders lead. I've always led my life by filling vacuums. When nobody is doing something, that's what I'll do. I'm not going to repeat what you're doing because you're already doing it. So I try to find that. I've become, Harry Truman is my favorite Democrat. And he made a statement that I don't give them hell. I just tell the truth and they think it's hell. And I'm at the point, and I've been doing this since 1960, and I've been giving speeches since 61, 62. And I've been doing a lot of philosophical stuff and red meat stuff over the years. And I've just come to the conclusion that the only way we're going to solve the problems of California are by recalling as many people as possible. It doesn't take a Republican Party or Democrat Party to do it. It doesn't take any partisanship. It has to take the people who are fed up, who are mad as hell and won't take it anymore, to say enough is enough. And that's what it's really going to take. And what happens in those cases, leaders come to the top who never thought they were leaders. People who never thought they had it in them. I've watched movements over the years, all sorts of movements, from the anti-tax movement, property protection, civil liberties movements, all of this, education movements. People come to the top naturally. You just can't appoint somebody and say, you're the leader. Or somebody can't say, well, I'm the leader. The real problem, Jane, in society today is we have too many people who see a parade, they pick up a baton, they move to the front of the parade and think they're the ones that caused the parade to exist, that they're the leader. They aren't. They're phonies. The people who created that parade know who they are, they know what they're doing, and let's get rid of people with the baton who jump to the head of the line.
Well, I want to close with a question that I think is dear to your heart, Steve, because the audience may not be aware of this, but this man is unendingly generous to people who are trying to fight for freedom in California. I can go on and on and on about the things he does in support of helping candidates and helping people train and learn about how to do this, beyond the generosity of his incredible number of speaking engagements for a year. We have one guest tonight who says, I want to run for a city council position, but I don't know how. Is it possible to keep my day job and still work in city council or a student board?
If you're talking about the city of Los Angeles, no. If you're talking about the city of Los Gatos, Los Altos, Cupertino, absolutely. Based on the size of the city, you can. And in fact, I think you should, because the problem with politicians is once they get inside of City Hall, they lose all sense of perspective, because now they're listening to staff people who they think know so much, and they listen to them enough that they vote the way the staff tells them to instead of the way the people want. So you need to keep your feet inside of City Hall, but also inside the community, and listen to the people when they tell you what they want, what they need, what their desires are, and not just the hacks who are staff members who get higher pay because there's bigger government.
Well, Steve, you are a treasure in California. You have your finger on the pulse of what's going on too. And I encourage everyone who is listening tonight to follow Steve on Twitter, to sign up for his newsletter, which he stays up, I don't know, I want to say midnight, but I have a feeling it's later, 6 nights a week. I wake up to this in my mailbox. It's just an amazing amount of really, really good information. So I encourage you to follow Steve, and we appreciate you so much being here tonight.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Your group is well-known statewide. You are a group that people look to for philosophical leadership, not political leadership. And that's a good thing. We need groups that are leading the way with the foundation of freedom rather than election.
Thank you so much, Steve.